Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Brennan. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter, and we have got a great guest lined up for the show. Friend of the show, Clark Brooks. You probably know him best as the SEC StatCat, talking the top returning quarterbacks and running backs in the SEC. A very, very, very in-depth conversation with Clark. We'll get to that in just a minute, but we've actually, had a little bit of news this week and potentially some big news here at Florida and LSU, particularly with spring football right around the corner. I believe they're about a week away from starting spring practice, so we'll get to that in just a second, but we are recording here late February 23rd to be exact. This is the earliest that I can ever recall that these Game of the Year point spreads are up, and these are courtesy of FanDuel. I don't know what the limits are quite on these. Usually these come out in, I want to say maybe like May or June. That's kind of when we'll get more and more of these to really start filtering in. But we've got some interesting ones here featuring many SEC teams. So I just do a little brief rundown of the ones that have debuted on FanDuel. These are going to change. But again, this is the best time to bet on these. Again, I don't know what the limits are. You'll have to go to FanDuel for yourself. Not a sponsor or anything, and check them out. But these lines, everyone I'm listing here, will probably shift. And some of them potentially shift significantly from when they open. So let's get into it right here. Week 1. We got 2 games to keep an eye on. South Carolina versus North Carolina in Charlotte. I think most people would assume the Gamecocks going to be favored in that game with all the momentum at the tail end of the season, getting their quarterback, their star receiver back. But no, it's North Carolina that debuted as a 1.5 favorite. According to FanDuel, this game's in Charlotte. You can never tell what you're going to get out of the Gamecocks right out the gate. They have struggled under Shane Beamer early in the season, but I still wouldn't favor North Carolina in this matchup. So this may be an opportunity to take advantage of these early spreads. I'd bet South Carolina getting points. That's a smart bet right there. This other one, same deal. LSU versus Florida State in the opener. It is in Orlando, so a little bit of a home field advantage for Florida State, I have to imagine. But they have Florida State favored over the defending SEC West champions by just a point. So really just a toss-up type game. But I don't know. I think all this FSU hype, I think it's getting out of control. Having them favored over LSU. This is probably a top 10 preseason showdown. LSU deserves top 10 billing. Florida State, I ain't buying it. So again, I tend to favor LSU in this matchup. How about this one? This will be an SEC matchup soon enough. Not this season, though. Texas at Alabama. Crimson Tide favored by 8.5 points over the Longhorns. That feels about right. We'll have to see if Sarkisian can get this team up to snuff here. I know they gave Alabama a great game last season. Nearly knocked off the Crimson Tide, but that's an interesting line. Texas A&M favored by 4.5 out on the road at Miami. That's another interesting line, considering A&M, the struggles they had. But Miami was just as bad in a weaker league. So I get it. A&M, I was kind of surprised they'd be a 4.5 point favorite on the road against Miami, but not a stunning development there. This one is pretty surprising, given the history of these two. Tennessee on the road at Florida. Vols favored by 6.5 points, nearly a touchdown favorite in Gainesville. Ooh, boy, I ain't touching that one. Florida, hell, even last year, they made it close at the end. That game was not really that competitive till the very end, but that's interesting. We got another Florida game here. Georgia versus Florida in Jacksonville, of course. Massive spread, biggest spread on the board here. Georgia favored by 17.5 points in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Ooh. Gotta hope the game's a little bit more competitive than that. LSU at Alabama. Alabama favored by 8.5 in that showdown, a rematch from last year, LSU winning. Georgia at Tennessee. Georgia favored by 7.5. Kind of surprised that it's that low. I'd probably bet up Georgia on that one. And then I know this is not technically an SEC game, but I'm counting them. They're in the family now. Texas, Oklahoma, playing at the Texas State Fair. The Longhorns favored by 5 points. So those are all the games that FanDuel currently has listed with a point spread. Get over there. Again, not a sponsor or anything, but this is an opportunity to grab some value in some of these before the line shift, which I guarantee is going to happen with the vast majority of these, especially as we get closer and closer to kickoff. Now, I referenced this in the opening real quick. Florida. Man, you thought it was a roster reset for Billy Napier and company. Now it's a coaching reset. 3 coaches have left in the last couple of hours here from Billy Napier's initial staff here, starting most significant, the defensive coordinator, Patrick Toney. It's not to say that I don't know if this will truly be a loss because the Florida defense was terrible. Some people were surprised Billy Napier didn't fire this guy outright, but he has gotten a job with the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL. So new defensive coordinator in Gainesville will be none other than former Southern Miss defensive coordinator Austin Armstrong, who had been hired by Nick Saban to be the new Alabama linebackers coach and co-defensive coordinator. Of course, that's just in the title, basically saying you cannot leave unless you go full-time defensive coordinator somewhere, and that's what's happening here in Gainesville. So Florida already had one of the youngest, if not the youngest, defensive coordinator in the SEC. Toney was in his, I think he was like 32. This Austin Armstrong's 29. Little babyface guy down there. But I have heard initial buzz down there. Alabama was very excited to bring Austin Armstrong on the Nick Saban staff, coach up the linebackers. Is a loss for the Crimson Tide, no doubt. It's going to be interesting to see. I've heard some mixed things about him being promoted as a defensive coordinator full-time for the Florida Gators. He worked previously with Billy Napier down there in Louisiana, so there's familiarity. And I wonder how much of this has to do with the fact, referenced it earlier, Florida's got spring football coming up right around the corner. So you certainly couldn't go into that without having a defensive coordinator. You may remember early in the week, we discussed, the biggest questions for each of these SEC teams. My biggest one for Florida was the defense. And if it was going to turn the corner under Patrick Toney, obviously can't say that now. So the biggest question, now we have a new coordinator. I don't want to say a completely new playbook, but the players are going to be learning something different scheme, different terminology, something under Austin Armstrong, who at Southern Miss, his defenses were among the best in the country when you're talking havoc plays, tackles for loss, forcing turnovers, things of that nature. But Dave Bartu, guy we reference all the time here, CFB Matrix, this was not an impressive hire according to his metrics. I believe he had Southern Miss as the 71st best scoring efficiency defense in the country. And Adam McClintock, the CFB professor, we've referenced his play caller rankings time and time again. Anytime there's a coordinator change, Austin Armstrong ranked 64th in the country, adjusted for roster talent, which is critical. You're adjusting for the talent he had to work with at Southern Miss, going against the talent they faced year in, year out. So not a grand slam by any means, but potentially a rising up-and-comer. Who knows? This Austin Armstrong could be a hell of a coach, and the fact that Nick Saban brought him on, you got to believe that he's got an outstanding reputation, particularly on the defensive side of the football. So there is reason for optimism if you're Florida Gators. But then again, if this guy was that great, Nick Saban had the opportunity to name him as defensive coordinator. He went and got Kevin Steele, of course, which he's got a longer track record in not only in college football, but obviously the SEC than Austin Armstrong. So again, maybe that's not a fair comparison. Kevin Steele's worked for Nick Saban I think this is his third tour of duty down there in Tuscaloosa. So I get it, but that's going to be interesting to see. The tight ends coach, William Pigler, he also left for the NFL. And then another one, receivers coach Kerry Colbert, who was at Southern Cal before coming to Florida. Just his 1 year there, he's making over $500,000 to be the receivers coach at Florida. He has now jumped, I believe, to the Denver Broncos. And the Gators just signed 3 4-star receivers. 2 of them are already on campus as early enrollees. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But, the way that the roster has turned over in Gainesville, it was almost like a year zero there for Billy Napier. Now he's having to replace 3 full-time staff members going into year 2 with spring practice a week or so away. Man, I think if nothing else, I'm not sitting here saying that Florida's going to have an awful year because they lost a coordinator that wasn't that good last year. That doesn't make any sense. But maybe reset expectations a little, because we all know the roster turnover, now the coaching turnover at a pivotal time. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what the expectations should be for Billy Napier's Florida Gators. And after the way last season ended, man, there's reason for doubt. But again, I think we got to give this guy time. But that's hard to do when your key rival is dominating college football, and teams like Tennessee, South Carolina, division rivals, at least for one more season, seemingly on the rise. Now, the other one, real quick, LSU. I referenced that earlier show we did this week, questioning biggest concerns, coach, things we'd ask at SEC Media Days. For LSU, it was special teams. Brian Polian was a disaster, I thought, as special teams coordinator. What's the confidence that gets fixed? Well, I think we come to find out that, Brian Kelly wasn't too happy either, because Brian Polian no longer the special teams coordinator. The timing of this, very interesting. Brian Polian has shifted to a GM role off the field. We'll see, what comes of that. But, special teams opening. Again, I don't know why they waited this point in time to make this decision, but it is potentially great news for LSU, because the special teams can't get any worse than it was last year. And I think it's kind of a damning indictment here that former head coach, longtime coordinator, Brian Polian, has been with Brian Kelly a long, long time. Now he's shifted to an off-the-field role. And I've heard some rumblings they were kind of waiting for him to land another job so they wouldn't have to fire him. And they didn't fire him. They just reassigned him off the field. And who knows? This GM role, maybe this will serve them well. I know several teams in the SEC and across the country have these GMs. And with the NIL, with the transfer portal, those positions becoming more and more valuable to programs. This could be a genius move for Brian Kelly. If nothing else, I think it's a great move getting him off the field as a special teams coordinator, because he clearly didn't do a good job for the Tigers last season. But that's enough of me just sitting here talking. Let's kick it over to our interview with Clark Brooks, the SEC StatCat. This guy does his homework, well researched. I mean, you should see this data that he's sent over to me. It makes my head spin just looking at it all. So let's kick it over to SEC StatCat. All right, we're pleased to be once again joined by friend of the show, Clark Brooks. You know him best as the SEC StatCat. Give him a follow at SEC_StatCat. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And of course, he works for On3 Sports. Clark, thank you so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same ways, Mike. It's always an honor to talk ball with you.
And man, I just had to have you on because I know over there at On3, this is what we all do in the off season, but the effort, the time, the energy that you put into this, you're not just throwing stuff against the wall. So I value your opinion, especially, of course, when it comes to the SEC over, the vast majority of people like myself putting these lists together. So top 10 returners in the SEC. You've kind of been formulating that. I want to focus the conversation on quarterbacks and running backs on this episode. But before we get into it, though, I mean, how can you just briefly go into your metrics for this and how much time and effort you really do put into these lists?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a many ways to skin a cat, as they like to say. For me, StatCat, I like to marry the good old-fashioned eye test with dependable metrics. So, all stats aren't created the same. Yards, volume stats that can be easily distorted by volume and usage rates and all of those types of other things that aren't standardized from team to team, from situation to situation. So you have to look at a little bit more play-to-play efficiency. So I always like impactful players, touchdowns, conversions, plays that normal players can't make. So if you're a wide receiver and if you're erasing an interception with a contested catch or racing right on by somebody in the open field and turning a 10-yard gain into a 40-yard touchdown, those are things that obviously pop on tape and things that absolutely stand out on the stat sheet as well. But like for defenders, I also like things that can disrupt, with defenders basically being obstacles in space. You're all about measuring how those guys can make it difficult on the offense. If you're a defensive lineman, how much havoc are you getting? Are you getting in the backfield? Are you making two guys account for you, freeing up another one of your teammates? How often are you getting a tackle for a loss? How often are you getting a pressure per your pass rush opportunities? Because, again, you can rack up a lot of pass rush stats over, you should rack up a lot of pressures over 1,000 pass rush snaps. But if you're not doing it at like a fairly efficient rate compared to your peers, who really cares, right? So it's all about stabilizing and standardizing things across a lot of different situations, which involves numbers, a lot of study, as you mentioned, with film, and of course, knowing what they're doing schematically. Because if you look at somebody in Tennessee's offense, they pop a little bit easier than if you're watching somebody in Kentucky's offense, just because of the order of operations and how they facilitated things. So it's about marrying a whole lot of different aspects and trying to spit out one big digestible number at the end of the day, because, with each different position having different metrics, it can get a little messy, but everyone can just say, oh, it's like a Madden rating. He's a 99. It's a lot more understandable and easier to talk about.
So let's start with the quarterbacks, Clark. I know we originally touched base a couple weeks ago, and you said even the list you put out then needed to be updated. So I'm working with an outdated list here. I'm curious to hear who you have right now as the top returning quarterback in the SEC.
Top returning quarterback in the SEC. It's a name that's probably going to bring a smile to your face. It's KJ Jefferson. He is a absolute hoss in the run game. There's no doubt about it, whether it is going empty and they're doing kind of split zone action, or if they're doing quarterback counters, kind of gap scheme north and south things to get the ball in his hands. But one thing that I can't ignore, and there is kind of not a whole lot of separation between 1, 2, 3, 4 in the conference, but I do give him the edge because of his designed rushing ability. And he also returns with the SEC's best catchable pass rate. So, not every pass is gauged the same in my charting system. An accurate pass is where you're hitting a guy in stride with minimal adjustments, where he doesn't have to do anything to negate the optimization of the route, having to stop, dive, or anything like that, where you can get a lot more yards after the catch. He was one of the better ones at giving his guys an opportunity to actually catch it. Pinpoint accuracy, like I just mentioned, though, he was below average. So there is some areas of opportunity for him to improve his game. Of course, in 2021, under Kendall Briles' tutelage, he led the SEC in deep pass rate. That's very sexy. But the problem is he's losing Kendall Briles this offseason. So how is he going to manage Dan Enos' guidance over Kendall Briles, who runs a very quarterback-friendly scheme, like Tennessee, that super spread, Baylor spread type of offense that's all about pace, space, and putting asses in grass. So he's absolutely number one. I would say number two is Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, he is his best self, no doubt about it, when he is scrambling to space. He still takes an awful lot of sacks. According to my charting metrics, 3 quarterbacks were in the major danger zone in sack to pressure ratio. Will Levis, which has drawn a lot of criticism this draft season for his propensity to take sacks. Hendon Hooker, who is a very much risk adverse in terms of throwing downfield, but he himself was a fairly good scrambler. And then Jaden Daniels, So while Jaden Daniels is really good on zone read keeps and running to space when there's no one there, when everyone is just turning their backs to him, as a design runner, as a sack eraser, not quite there. Even though his West Coast operation really is, safe. We saw during parts of last year where Brian Kelly was almost begging him to throw more downfield, to almost like dare him to throw interceptions. And when we saw Garrett Nussmeier get in there, where he had that kind of a risky style of play, that YOLO style of play, it really did elevate that offense. You can really see how there is area of opportunity for him as well. Even though, yeah, he is very accurate. I think he has the top returning accuracy figure in terms of on-target passes. His operation was just short. And if he's just not as a dangerous downfield thrower with someone like Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 2 in the SEC, or wide receiver 1, depending on who you ask. I have Anaya Smith slightly ahead just because of his all-encompassing game, his return game, his stuff in the backfield that Jimbo Fisher kind of likes to do. But very, very good situation for Jaden Daniels there, and bringing back a pretty proven line, I think, should maybe help him be a little bit more comfortable this year. Get the ball out quick, because like Hendon Hooker, sometimes he held the ball a beat too long when someone was potentially open downfield and he just didn't see him. Scouts aren't going to like that, and of course Brian Kelly's certainly not going to like that. So that's one area of opportunity for him, in addition to improving his downfield aggressiveness. And then we have a newcomer, Devin Leary. Now, Clark, Devin Leary's come off an awful season, or not an awful season, but a fairly mediocre, forgettable season before his injury. Well, 2 years ago, he had one of the top touchdown interception ratios in the nation. When I charted him against his 5 hardest opponents, his accuracy tracked to be one of the top 3 in the SEC. He can attack all levels of the field. His issue, though, he's kind of a slight build. He's not like Will Levis. He's not 6'4". He's more 6'1", 6'2". So if you're throwing towards the middle of the field, his vision could be a little bit more impaired than Will Levis, which could mean, like we mentioned with these other quarterbacks, holding on to the ball a beat too long, or what he did during his scouting tapes against his 10 hardest opponents last 2 years, sail passes. And you don't want to leave your guy high and dry over the middle, because even we saw with Levis, if you're a little bit behind with UK's young developing wide receiver core, caroms and things slightly off the mark can lead to interceptions, which for Kentucky's modus operandi, that is just absolutely devastating. They don't run a lot of plays. They don't lean into the explosive play battle. They're all about time of possession. And when you're giving opponents extra possessions, that is absolutely detrimental. But because of how he can move, how he is going to be paired with Liam Combs, how Dane Key and Barian Brown are going to move in that year 2, and how he is going to basically fall into a scheme that ran a decent amount of the staples he ran at NC State. So we're talking about like tray sets, 3x1, verts, shock, inverted stick, all curls, shallow, stuff like that. Kind of things that were sprinkled in when UK was under Liam Combs in 2021, and they were kind of faded this last season under Rich Scangarillo. But because of the environment and just the overall experience of him attacking at all levels of the field accurately, I really like him to be a top 3 passer entering this upcoming season.
Now, let me ask you something, Clark. Like I said, I'm working with a little bit a list that you've updated your own, so I may be incorrect here. But
No problem.
you mentioned Garrett Nussmeier there, and on the list I have, you don't have him as top 10, and maybe that's just due to lack of volume of actually grading him. But you got some guys on the list I'm looking at that fit that mold, that don't have a ton of snaps. Where would you put Garrett Nussmeier in here? And I'm certainly not suggesting that LSU should go with Garrett Nussmeier, but there's reason to believe he may be, like you said, raises the ceiling of that offense. So it wouldn't be a stunner either if he's a starting quarterback. How do you see him in your model there?
He is a hold right now. I am ready to boost him up to give him like a 92, 93 grade if he is a starter, or if he enters the transfer portal, which I am not ruling out. I'm sure Auburn is absolutely drooling at the potential that they can have if they get him or someone like Jackson Dart in their offense. So I think we're going to see a couple more transfers after this spring period. I'm not going to rule him out, but that's why I left him out, just because Jaden Daniels is just so entrenched at the starter position at this time. But look, I can't deny his playmaking. And to speak to his YOLO style of play, no other SEC quarterback last year was both top 5 in interceptable pass rate and explosive pass rate than Garrett Nussmeier, while leading the SEC with I think only Hendon Hooker had a higher average depth of target. So he wasn't just rinky dinking, and he was really trying to stretch the field. So it's really an attractive style of play when you're coming from someone like me who's looking across the entire conference and everyone's trying to do these RPOs, horizontal spacing concepts, and you get a guy like him who could just come in and just really get your eyeballs popping. Kind of like the guy down there in Knoxville who might be starting there, Mike. What do you think about old Joe Milton?
Bazooka Joe, we call him down here in this state. I mean,
I love that nickname. I love that
he's
nickname.
going to win 2 Heismans this year. He's got that strong an arm, but no, I'm not sold on him. I got to be honest with you, but I think given what we saw against Clemson, the progression that he made from 2021 when he came out the gate, he looked significantly better. But again, that was a bowl game. Those are oddities. Clemson was down some guys, but particularly his efficiency in the red zone stood out to me to where it gives me confidence that Joe Milton, the offense is not going to take a huge step back, in my opinion, even if he's not Hendon Hooker caliber, and expecting him to be that, I think would be unrealistic for most Vol fans.
Oh, of course. I mean, Hendon Hooker had one of the best clips in my records at throwing like interceptable passes. Not throwing it into harm's way. Obviously, when you're throwing more errant and off-target passes, that tends to go up, and that tends to kind of be Joe Milton's game right now. But with the weapons they have, I mean, look, Squirrel White, if I can say his name correctly, led college football last year in yards per route run. That is the premier receiver efficiency metric. It was over 4 yards. That's insane. If he's going to be the Jalen Hyatt role from the slot, I mean, the sky's the limit for him. And then when you're thinking of someone like Deontay Thornton, who's coming from Oregon through the transfer portal, 6'5", he has the build to potentially be a Cedric Tillman 2.0 if he can put some mass on his frame. And you're bringing back Brew McCoy, who's a bulldog himself at the X wide receiver position on the far right of the formation. So he has a lot of weapons. While the offensive line is going to lose some pieces, while the running backs themselves don't necessarily do it for me, it's very much a committee type of system. I think Josh Heupel has earned the benefit of the doubt looking at like kind of the mid passers he had at UCF. I'm not the biggest Dylan Gabriel fan. I think he underthrows passes a whole lot, but just how he can recognize when a defense is vulnerable on the back end and when he's able to take a shot, there's no one skill set you would like better than someone who can throw it 50 yards downfield and give this guy an opportunity to come down with it. Sure, yes, like I said, raw accuracy still very much needs to be improved. His lower body mechanics need to be a little bit more in sync. But with what he is right now, there's no reason to believe that Tennessee cannot continue to be one of the top offenses in the SEC.
Now, you're very high, obviously, on Devin Leary, Kentucky's presumed starting quarterback. And people that I respect, they said he was the best quarterback in the transfer portal. So I'm not calling you out here, but number 3 in the SEC, that's going to be rich for a lot of people. I know we're not particularly deep in the SEC, but And you said it yourself, we can't just compare him to Will Levis because they're different players. But when Will Levis came to Kentucky, he had more rushing attempts at Penn State than he had passing attempts. Say what you want about Will Levis, he's probably looks like he's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. He stabilized Kentucky at that position. They won 10 games his first season. Having said all that, with Liam Cohen back, with the weapons he'll have to work with, would it be stunning at all if Devin Leary, by the end of the season, is the SEC's best quarterback?
I don't think it's stunning because, again, like I really do value accuracy, and he has a track record of throwing an accurate ball. And Liam Cohen's going to try, in theory, give him opportunities to attack space. Kentucky, under Rich Scangarello, so you want to think more Kyle Shanahan. So that's more flood-based patterns as opposed to kind of like and stick patterns as opposed to kind of vertical stuff that are like deep crosses with overtop posts, which was a very noticeable staple under the Rams for many, many years and still kind of is with Sean McVay there. So I think with how the tutelage is and his skill set, he's going to be maximized very, very well. Because again, if he's not running for his life, and that is the big caveat with Kentucky, how's that offensive line going to hold up? They are bringing in a transfer from MAC, and last time I checked, the SEC defensive lines are a little bit more stout than things found in the middle of the country. So I don't know how that's going to go. So he obviously was not the same guy when things broke down last year and he had to operate under pressure and be a sack eraser. That's just not his game. He has to be a pre-snap processor, get the ball out quick, and attack space. Now, I think he can do that. I absolutely have no doubt in my mind. There's a reason I have him number 3, but I am not without my reservations that it could definitely hit a snag just because of the line up front. His size is not necessarily the best at dealing with that, and he has a track record for his accuracy to fall off a cliff in those situations.
Now, 2 guys you haven't referenced yet, Will Rogers, who I think you affectionately refer to as check down Charlie. He's in a more of an explosive passing attack system now under Kevin Barbay, so I'm interested to see where you got him. And I can hear the angry typing now from Columbia, South Carolina, with Spencer Rattler not yet named. Where do you have those 2?
I still really like Spencer Rattler's game. This time last year, I had him as the top non-5-star quarterback. So, like, if you had a great week 1, you're a 5-star. I think you're going to be a first-round talent. But as we saw, some of the trepidations that he came into the league with kind of maintained. Like, he himself became a check-down Charlie his second starting year at Oklahoma and started the year as such. Are you ready for this stat, Mike? So, up until the Tennessee game, only 10% of his passes traveled beyond 20 yards downfield. 1 out of 10 passes. Do you know what it was the final 3 games of the season? 23%. It more than doubled. And while I mentioned the turnover battle earlier, no single battle has more correlated to wins and losses in SEC football the last half decade than winning the explosive play battle. And of course, explosive passes on average tend to gain more than explosive runs. And so when you're just leaning into that style of play and you're giving yourself more opportunities, guess what? You can beat one of the best teams in the country. Guess what? You can upset Clemson. Guess what? You can keep Notre Dame on the ropes for most of the game until you figured out you couldn't run the ball. But that is one thing I have my eye on. It's a new play caller. So how much was that just being, okay, it's the end of the year, YOLO ball, I gotta put my arm on tape as what was Eli Manning's doppelganger that he did at Penn State? Was it like Chad Power? Whatever. He said, gotta get the arm on tape. Gotta get the arm on tape. I don't know if he was going Chad Power mode or not, but he was that's what his style of play was what I wanted to see the entire season. Yes, he's going to throw interceptable passes. That is just who he is. But he's got arm talent that he can make throws that no one can. Even in week 1, he's rolling right. He throws the ball like 40 yards downfield on the money. You can't teach that. So yes, I just need to see a little bit more consistency, because like when you look at the things that South Carolina did with the check down Charlie approach to pad his down-to-down accuracy and trying to avoid interceptable passes, well, his raw accuracy was 66%. It was one of the better ones in the conference. But when you strip away screens, RPOs, and we were looking at things like 10 yards downfield, when you're just looking at drop back passes without screens and RPOs in there, he's much closer to average, even though his 10+ yard accuracy, the thing that I really like, was top 3 throughout the entire season last year. Not even towards the end of the year. It was consistent. So leaning into that, giving him more downfield, game-changing type of throws, I think would really behoove Darryl Loggins to pursue. Because, he's coming from that super spread offense in Arkansas, and there is a little bit of question. What exactly are they going to do? Are they going to do some of those slide RPOs underneath? They're going to keep it more bubble oriented with Wells on the perimeter, trying to get him the ball in space. How are they going to use their new 5-star Harbor? Are they going to get involved in that in that type of orientation and that type of approach? But for me, it's just how can they get the better version of him, get the best version out of him by giving him downfield opportunities, because I do think they have the receiving core to get open downfield and do damage, not only against Tennessee's sorry ass secondary, but against other people as well.
So where do you have Mississippi State's favorite son, Will Rogers?
Will Rogers, he is right under Mr. Rattler. So, and that's just because I wait and see. How is he going to react without Mike Leach being his captain? I mean, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm getting pulled 1,000 different ways with the updates with the transfer rankings and the impact rankings. But when I was doing my scheme review for the last flight of the air raid, there were some things that were kind of regressing and kind of concerned me. And some of that was downfield, like 20+ yard completions, accuracy, usage. He was much more, take what the defense gave him. Mike Leach was less inclined to run patterns that I think unlocked downfield potential, because a lot of what the air raid patterns are about are 7 yards and in. And if the defense is peaking, then you can throw over top. There's not a whole lot of double moves or kind of gadgetry innate in that scheme, but there are elements like those fake screens, those wheel stuff that you're bluff blocking, then you're running up the seam. Those things fell off a cliff. Skipper sail, thumb. So these are like bend back crosses. We saw this in the Super Bowl. So think Kelsey to Mahomes. Of course, there's a lot of examples in that play where he was running across the field like on a cross route. He stopped and then he was breaking back towards the sideline. That's thumb. And that's great, because if you're thinking of how the defense is going to react to that on the back end, you either have to stay back or allow a completion. If you want to cap it or take it away, you have to overcut it. So if you're coming down to overcut it and he's going to break the other way, there's going to be a natural void there. So again, when you run Y cross on 1 out of 10 plays, when you're setting up that weak flood action, it would behoove you to run that stuff a little bit more, especially because by rate, you were the least explosive passing offense in the SEC. The air raid became a ball control offense. So I can't say a ball control game manager is, special. Right. But if you say, there is a lot of reputation with the new play caller's ability to get explosive plays, it's just, okay, how can you get it out of them? Are you going to get it through yak stuff? Are you going to, like Spencer Rattler, goad him to take more downfield shots and be a little bit more aggressive version of himself? It's more wait and see type of him.
Now, I don't think you're going to get much debate when you're talking the top 4 quarterbacks. You could throw in Larry, the top 5. So now is when you really get kind of some I don't want to say guesswork, but a lot of fans, it's going to be guesswork. Who do you have as the next tier quarterbacks in the SEC?
Next would be Carson Beck, and it's just because of the area of opportunity around him. Look, you're bringing in 2 top-tier transfers in Ra Thomas, who was the de facto deep threat, I would say, for Mississippi State's rinky-dinky offense at the X receiver position. And then you're bringing in the guy who had the second most deep receiving yards, only behind Jalen Hyatt this year, and Dominic Lovett, despite the fact, who was throwing to him? Brady Cook. He was bottom 5 in deep accuracy and 10-plus yard downfield accuracy. So he had that going against him, and despite that, he still hauled in a lot of deep yards. So if you're bringing in a fantastic unit up front, Xavier Truss, Sam Pran, and
is it Mims?
Yes, Amarius Mims.
Yeah.
And you're bringing in Amarius Mims, a fantastic bookend himself, who's, you got to replace Broderick Jones and McClendon. But gosh, if there's anyone to do it, Amarius Mims, he's absolutely high in my book. So, I have him as like a day 2 grade, a high day 2 grade right now. And, he's really has very little starting experience, but him playing as a reserve really teases high upside. And of course, you're bringing back the SEC's best overall player to have at your side in Brock Bowers. So like I said, I'm in the middle of drawing up schemes, and I'm doing Georgia's run stuff right now. Dude pops on tape even there. He's knocking Harold Perkins, who's a defensive dynamo, out of position. He's acting as a lead blocker on counter. He's catching deflected wheel patterns. What can Brock Bowers do? And I know, Darnell Washington is going to be sorely missed, but when you're elevating Oscar Delp, I'm like, boo-hoo. I don't feel any recompense for Mr. Carson Beck. I think he should absolutely slide in, and even though Todd Monken's not going to be there, and even though I do think Mike Bobo's best days are behind him, I do think there's going to be a whole lot of carryover from the previous operation, and not a whole lot of waves. I think it's going to be kind of business as usual. We're going to have a balanced approach, balanced run in terms of zone and gap schemes, and in terms of run pass type of stuff with a high elements of screens, RPOs, and drop back play action, because I like to mention that as kind of a caveat when you're trying to evaluate the super spread quarterback. So think of kind of the scrutiny that Matt Corral got last year with all those tap passes and operating in RPO heavy type of scheme under Lane Kiffin. Well, outside of the super spread guys, no other SECer had a higher percentage of screens, RPOs, drop back play actions than Mr. Stetson Bennett. So you tell me if he was game manager or not, Mike. So that seems like he was game manager to me. Sure, he got a lot of results. He's going to be a freaking legend. His car dealership's going to make buku bucks one day. But it's just where the way everything is built down there, they could slide in a very mediocre type of talent and still get a lot of results. So I still think Carson Beck is going to be a draftable person at the end of the day. It's just short term. I think he's still going to be that next guy right after Rodgers as a head of whatever Alabama quarterback they decide to throw out there at this point in time. And of course, like we mentioned, if Nussmeier transfers in somewhere or Jackson Dart transfers in somewhere, we're boom, there we have our next quarterback, because it looks like neither is going to be a starter. It looks like it's going to be Mr. Oklahoma State's Spencer Sanders. He's the next guy up. And it's only because, he's an old guy. He kind of has a propensity to put the ball in the harm's way a little bit. It is going to be a new system. I mean, Ole Miss is bringing in a lot of new faces, so like they got to get chemistry going this spring. So I think it's going to be a slower start, but by the end of the year, I think he could leapfrog some people. But I think Spencer Sanders, just where we have him in the top 25 in the transfer portal, and his track record of just being a fairly capable college quarterback, and him being paired with Lane Kiffin, I think he would be next in line. But I don't have a whole lot of faith in Walker Howard nor Jackson Dart to wrestle that job away from him. But I have been wrong before.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's the biggest quarterback competition all across the SEC down there in Oxford, and Lane Kiffin's track record. Like you said, it's hard to project who they're going to be starting anywhere.
It seems like every year we have this debate, don't we? It was either John Luis Plumlee or Matt Corral, and then okay, is it going to be Luke Altmaier? Is it going to be Jackson Dart? And now here we are, third straight year quarterback battle, or 3 out of 4 years quarterback battle. So nothing new down there. But what's the old saying? Conflict brings about the best results, or something like that. I don't know.
Iron sharpens iron, all that garbage.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron. That BS and that all that coach speak. So, I'm sure Juice Kiffin's all about that type of stuff.
So we haven't even got to Joe Milton yet. Is he next on your list?
Yes, Joe Milton is next on my list. Just because of areas that we talked about. Arm strength is there, area of opportunity is there with the scheme and his weapons. It's just down accuracy. Can you refine yourself a little bit? Can you show that you can do things when things break down, not throw the ball in the harm's way, and still give your guy an opportunity to catch the ball? Because, when he was coming out of Michigan, his first year, early 2021, one of the things that really did stand out is when his base was just altered, he was just a complete mess. And so if he's not just standing from the pocket and he's forced to be flushed right or left, which can happen when you execute one-man routes, Mike, that one man isn't open, where you're going to go with the ball. You got to have to make something happen. Of course, Hendon Hooker was pretty good at that. I still need to see a little bit of that ability from Joe Milton moving forward. But high end is there. High end, I think for impact, I wouldn't be inclined to have him as a 94 type of rating, depending on how spring ball goes, if he shows to be a little bit more refined. I know it's a glorified practice, but still, it's the only glimpses we have from playing against a depleted Clemson secondary and before you're playing Poop State in week 1.
That's
it's kind of
this year it's Virginia. I don't know if you're considering them Poop State, but hell, the way they played last year, maybe.
Yeah, dude, they had 2 dynamo receivers. One of the more accomplished passers in Brennan Armstrong. They soured his reputation. I thought he was going to be like a left-handed Kyle Trask. Very similar style of play. Very prolific. Not afraid to throw the ball downfield. You got Wicks and Deontay Thornton, former Mississippi State or SECer, who is 6'5" and a massive catch radius. And you bring in a stale offense that didn't work when you had premier talent at Clemson, or you needed a Trevor Lawrence or a dynamic receiver like T. Higgins to make the most of a matchup-oriented style of play. Of course it wasn't going to work. So, I just don't really have that much respect for Virginia as a program right now, even though, Poop State may have been a little bit too far, but still, I just think that's going to be an easy win for Tennessee, based on where things are right now.
Now, again, the list I have outdated, perhaps, but the one I'm looking off here has got Jalen Milroe next on the list. What is he number 9 on your list, and why not Ty Simpson? What's your thoughts there?
It's just because, he had a little bit more reps than Ty Simpson's last year. Of course, bringing in Tommy Rees, it seems like, Ty Simpson's probably going to be the guy. They have a pass together. If they're going to go to a more classic Nick Saban offense, more under center, they still are multiple. They still use 12 personnel a whole lot. But you know what? I was not shy sharing the fact Alabama could not run the ball on first down each of the last 2 years with Bill O'Brien in charge. And one of the primary factors, they sucked at counter, Mike. Classic gap scheme, trapper, wrapper, two-side pullers, success rate in the 20s each of the last 2 years on first down. I mean, the best third down offenses are offenses that avoid third downs the best. And that simply was not Alabama the last 2 years. If it wasn't for Bryce Young's magician skills, I don't know where they would be. Certainly a lot more frustrated as a program based on their trajectory, not playing for a national championship or not winning a national championship either the last 2 years. Crazy standard, I know, but that's the standard they built for themselves. So I still think that Jalen Milroe, just because of his experience, might have the inside job, but of course it is going to be a total crapshoot. All bets are off once the spring ball starts, and we can see, who's going to start getting more reps with the ones, what the offense is actually going to look like, if there's going to be any type of carryover at all, or if it's going to try and resemble a little bit more what Notre Dame was doing last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's what I hear about Tommy Rees as well. I mean, they want to get back to the running game. They want to get away from hero ball where – yes, I mean, they've had some of the best quarterbacks in recent SEC history, but you can't always rely on that. And hell, I mean, Bryce Young may be the number one pick, and again, you lost multiple games with him. So is that kind of what you're hearing behind the scenes as well? I mean, they want to get back to and not only that, but it'll help the defense out, which certainly seems to be working well in Athens.
I mean, that's what I surmised from the situation for sure. I'm not thinking they're going to all of a sudden try and rip off Heupel's offense with Tommy Rees in charge and go a completely other way, even though that would be really fun. If if Saban's like, oh, so you want this to be football now? All right, we're going to be running the super spread now with our athletes. But no, yeah, I definitely think it's going to be kind of a more slower pace. Not that Alabama ran at a breakneck speed by any means under Bill O'Brien, but I definitely think that there's going to be a more emphasis on being better at those gap schemes, establishing the run, having more balance, and not having to lean on empty pass formations. Even though, don't get me wrong, I love the shock two-lane concept. I love what they were doing with trails. They were fantastic at it, don't get me wrong. But same time, I think Alabama is Alabama when it can impose its will, kind of like Georgia was this past season. Georgia did fun things in the pass game, but they were still able to run counter, toss, duo, inside zones at will. I mean, in fact, Georgia's offense was like the only instance I had the last three since I've been charting SEC offenses to have all 7 of their most repped pass concepts and 5 of their most repped 6 run concepts finish with at least a success rate of 50%. So think about that. The things that they were running the most worked over half of the time. That's a great recipe for success, and I can't tell you how difficult that is. Alabama 2020 didn't do it. Joe Burrow and them boys didn't do it. So gosh darn, Todd Monken having that type of ability to stretch defenses with the run pass, again with the versatility, that is just something that has been lacking from Tuscaloosa's offense the last couple of years. It's been a lot more zone-oriented because they haven't been able to pull people, but pulling people has a lot. Okay. So gap schemes, they kind of invite more cushion. Obviously, you're not trying to reach and seal. So on average, you will have a lower rush yard before contact average, but they have a higher degree of like perfect block rate. So when that block rate does hit, they have a better rate for going more yards. So you got to lean into avenues that open up explosive gains, because while the pass game has kind of been middling in that respect, you have to maintain your identity as a physical, we can get 10 yards when you're gassed in the second quarter and really put this game away type of approach.
Now, so who do you have number 10 rounding out your list?
Rounding out my list, I guess it would be Graham Mertz. I'm not the biggest fan of Graham Mertz. I like his anticipation skills. Don't get me wrong. It's just for someone who's built as a strong arm quarterback, I would have liked to have seen at least one pass attempt beyond 35 yards downfield in a 5-game sample. For instance, someone like Devin Leary had 20. So, yeah, not a whole lot of verticality from him. He kind of leaves the ball inside a little bit too much on outbreakers, but it's the type of thing where Florida really knows who they were last year, and they were a completely different offense when they were using play action. You can go look on SEC StatCat.com, Anthony Richardson splits. He was basically one of the most effective and efficient potent passers using play action. You strip that away and you look at his passing, his dropbacks without that stuff, he was damn near one of the worst in the conference. His uncatchable pass rate was worse than Robbie Ashford, which is, not the company you like to keep when you're trying to be a first-round pick or when you're put in the discussion of being the next Josh Allen. So I think play action is going to be his best friend. I think he's going to be at least a serviceable passer, and at least he's a little bit more preferable with his experience, with his skill set, than kind of the guys who are rounding out the rest of the conference. Connor Wegman, he's also in the discussion. Bringing in Bobby Petrino certainly raised my eyebrows. I'm not going to comment on whether it was a good or a bad hire. I'm just going to say it was definitely interesting, and I like interesting. So with his tutelage, it definitely does see what can they do, especially bringing back Anaya Smith, who I mentioned earlier, who I have as wide receiver one just because of his all-encompassing game, operating from the backfield, from the slot, as a return man, and what he can kind of be as a gadget player. But he was a little bit, I know he's 18 years old, 19 years old, but he just looked like a guy who needed yak stuff. He targeted the middle of the field. He was picking on linebackers to bring in a comparison for style of play, not for what style of pass they are. But think of Jimmy Garoppolo. A lot of the criticism with him was that he only throws to the middle of the field. He's afraid to throw outside the numbers. And when you look at his pass chart, it really does, the shortcoming really is accentuated. His accuracy just falls off a cliff the longer he has to throw the ball. And if you can't get the ball to your one-on-one matchups outside of the numbers and you can keep that defense kind of guessing where the ball's going to go, I just don't like where things are going to go for him. But still, he's young. He's developing. I'm not saying he's a lost cause by any means. It's just at this point in time, I have him on the outside looking in. It doesn't mean that he can't live up to his potential. It doesn't mean that his weapons can really make him look better or he can be one of the few Texas A&M passers to be one of the more explosive ones in the conference because, only Kentucky and Vanderbilt have less explosive passes than Texas A&M the last 3 years within the SEC. You got to fix that style, and it's not going to be through a rinky-dink type of passer. So, like a lot of the other guys, we got to see if he can throw the ball downfield, not throw the ball in the harm's way, and really round out where his pass plays go.
I'm going to go back to Graham Mertz real quick. Were you surprised that Billy Napier went in that direction? Do you think they should have went somewhere else? Or does he kind of fit that play action style that Napier loves to do?
Well, I think he's a fit. I don't think he was like option one by any means. Like, I don't think anyone had him as option one in the transfer portal, but with how things kind of progressed in a very short amount of time, I don't think it was, all right, we'll get him and now problem solved. I think it's like, okay, we get him and maybe we can see what else comes up later down the line. And if we have him here, look, we at least give him a head start over the other guy. So we at least have some type of a battle because look, Jack Miller, what he showed in the bowl game, long-term option, no, he's not going to be fighting for that job. So it would behoove them to probably bring in somebody else. But look, as things stand, he should be at least an average bar none passer that can keep you in ball games, manage that offense, let those two talented running backs you have in Montrell Johnson and Etienne, the young Etienne, really let them shine. And then, because that's kind of how he was at Wisconsin, right? He was the secondary aspect. And for better or worse, he was not good when behind the chains or when the run game didn't facilitate things for him. But you have to think with how Florida is revamping that offensive line and how they have really talented ball carriers that he's going to be his best self off play action.
Now let's get to the running backs. I don't want to take up all your day here, so let's just do top five. But I think right at the top of the list, we got a battle that neither one of these fan bases, and nor should they, but neither one's going to see that their guy is not better. And, of course, I'm talking right. Quinshaw Judkins at Ole Miss, Rocket Sanders at Arkansas, two of the best players in all the country, regardless of position. How do you see that playing out? Who do you give probably a minimal edge to?
Oh, no, I give a solid edge to Judkins. He's younger. He runs harder. He has really good stable metrics, as I like to say. So that's yards after contact average, broken tackle rate, and adjusted gumption. So that's how many times are you hit in the backfield? And of those times, how many times did you turn that into a positive gain? You're erasing losses. Not every running back is cut out for that. Not every running back is suited for running through contact or making guys miss, because that's the name of the game, right? It's blocking and tackling. How can you use that to your numbers advantage? Everyone can run to open space. And you know what? Raheem Sanders absolutely can run to open space. No SEC rusher had a higher degree of runs towards initial contact of 8 yards or more than him. So think about that. Basically, 45% of his yards came on those types of carries. That's an immense chunk. Consider someone like Chris Rodriguez, where it's like 13%, where he's having to fight in a phone booth every single carry. That was not Raheem Sanders. But because how Judkins was able to be the best of both worlds, he had the home run ability. He had the ability to make guys miss. He had the ability to win the edge. He had the ability to hit inside and be more consistent and not just be his best self running outside zone reads. I gave him the edge. Of course, he is younger. But yeah, Raheem Sanders, go look at his stat sheet. You're not going to find too many things to complain about, even though I could mention, he could have a little bit of a drop off because they're missing guys up front. And with that high degree of rush yards before contact, padding his rushing numbers, if that shrinks a little bit, and his tackle breaking and his yards after contact kind of stays in the above average zone, well, yeah, he's going to see a reduction increase. So that's something to monitor moving forward. But there's no doubt in my mind that is my 1-2 SEC running back pair heading into this season. And then number 3, this is where the debate starts. I have Jarquez Hunter. He was arguably the more exciting Auburn ball carrier each of the last 2 seasons. And when you look at stable metrics, well, he was on par with Tank Bigsby in yards after contact and tackle breaking. So that's one thing where, okay, no matter how bad or how mid or how, if they actually take a step up front, because that's been one of the major shortcomings with Auburn's offense the last couple of years has been disappointing line play, getting more daylight for their ball carriers to be their best self. Because look, there are plenty of examples of him winning tosses and winning foot races, making guys miss on the inside, and with the run-oriented attack under Hugh Freeze and Robbie Ashford, who is not a passer, they're going to have to lean on the run game. He seems to see an immense uptick in volume, but it's just a matter of how much Brian Beatty, who's further down the list, is going to take a little bit of that share away from him. He's the new guy coming from the transfer portal, who he himself was one of the top guys in the nation last year in yards per carry and explosive run rate. So talk about a home run threat. It's just a matter of how much of the down-to-down usage is he going to get? Is it going to be a true 50-50 split? As of right now, I think he's going to be the premier back. I think he's going to be see the lion's share of the carries and really be their focal point of the offense, which is why I gave him running back number 3 within the SEC. And then we go down to Tuscaloosa on the other side of Alabama. Chase McClellan, when he was filling in for Gibbs, I think he has the size and the tackle breaking ability to help this transition period between the Tommy Rees and the Bill O'Brien attack. It still remains to be seen, like we were talking about, if it's still going to be some more zones or if they're going to try and emphasize gap schemes again and make that an emphasis. But with whichever approach, he was pretty good as a ball carrier last year, and he should absolutely help Alabama find its footing offensively.
So safe to say, with the game on the line, going up against Alabama, Lane Kiffin, get Judkins on the damn field. What are we doing here?
Oh, for sure. I mean, why wouldn't you?
Well, he didn't. That's the problem.
I know. Like Zach Evans and Judkins, I mean, like, I get that there's some loyalty there, or like, we don't know if Judkins had like a stinger or something. We don't know. But
use him as a decoy.
Use him as a decoy in eye candy. I mean, if there was any offense to do that, it is his. But speaking of like the impact rating, so I put away 32 people at any given week, when I think they have first round talent, whether it is through ability or if it is through production. I have Quinton Judkins as the SEC's only other 5-star besides Brock Bowers. So that should speak how highly I think of him at this point in time at number 12 in all of college football.
Yeah, and apparently behind the scenes, I'm sure you've heard the rumblings as well. He was essentially the hottest free agent that wasn't a free agent in college football. So that speaks.
Well, what about
point.
Drake May? And that big old pay raise. I mean, gosh bless, man. That's the thing. Like, I don't know what's true anymore. Like, I have to treat, just because of the nature of my job, as everything is true, and I have to get a grade ready for everybody and be ready to justify it and be ready to turn around to our tech team to have it up in 5 minutes. So yeah. There are a number of guys like that on my radar, but yeah, Judkins, there's no doubt in my mind. If it wasn't, and there's still a name from the Big Ten who may or may not transfer, who I have a grade on, but without him, I mean, even with him in consideration, who I'm not naming, I would absolutely say Judkins would be the best running back to enter the portal if that did happen. But yeah, I'm very high on this young man. And it's like Josh Jacobs. When's the last time a 3-star came out of nowhere and just got your attention like this? When there's like 5 stars around, or 5 and 4 stars surrounding him throughout the conference, and he's the one driving the conversation. Like, he just seems like a difference maker and a true definition of the term gem.
Right. Well, Clark, I can't thank you enough for spending so much time breaking this all down for me. Again, follow Clark, SEC_StatCat. You can find a link to that in the show notes. Before you go, Clark, can you tell everybody what's the best way to find all your work?
Best way is to go to the website. I know I'm a little bit slow updating the content with my other responsibilities right now, but SECstatcat.com. All of the information's up to date. So even though if I'm not putting out articles or videos on that platform, you can still look at someone's pass chart. You can isolate it down to the route. You can just see if someone wants to throw curls, where they were going. You can see stuff with play action and filter things out just to show screens and RPOs if you're inclined to see how many times someone was hit behind the line of scrimmage. The filters and the applications are endless. It's meant to be user-friendly, where you can become a little bit more informed on your favorite teams, on your operations, things you can't find necessarily in the traditional box score. Like yards after contact, can't find that anywhere. Success rate, can't find that. So it's just a way and a resource for casual fans. I'm also in the process, like I mentioned a few times, in doing my SEC scheme reviews. So after many, many years of dragging my feet, I'm trying to do a YouTube page where I can do a little bit more scheme illustrations. So I'm going to rope all the common threads together. So all top 6 runs, top 7 passes, interesting wrinkles that gain big plays, going to put them all in a nice package together for each SEC team, and hopefully have that available sometime this spring. Like I mentioned, I'm in the middle of doing Georgia's right now, but again, it's a fantastic resource if you're trying to learn a little bit more about the game, the scheme, how people are utilized, and just become a little bit more informed than just, oh, this guy is good. Just give you a little bit more ammunition. Of course, with it being debate season and draft season, you got to like to have a lot of ammunition in terms of statistics, in terms of metrics, and in terms of being able to win arguments that way.
Yeah, man, that you got me excited just hearing all that. So I can't wait. When that comes out, we'll be sure to push that to our audience. Thank you, Clark. I really, really appreciate it. I think the audience will really love this information.
I hope so too, Mike. You have a great one. It was always a pleasure.
All right, so just want to say thanks again, Clark, for joining the show. And, man, that guy goes a million miles per hour, doesn't he? But very, very insightful, informative, outstanding interview. This is the content we need during the off season. And I just hope all y'all got as much info out of that as I did with his unique insight into SEC football. But, hey, that's going to do it for this week's shows. We got some more guests lined up for next week, and like I keep alluding to, spring football just around the corner, so it won't be long. We're going to have tons of nuggets, and hopefully no one gets injured, and we'll have player interviews, coaches interviews. We're going to be loaded up here, finish the month strong, and heading into spring. Cannot wait. I do appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out during the off-season times. Hopefully, we're making it a little bit more bearable to get through this off-season. But that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We'll catch you on the next one.